So Dom, Heleni, welcome again, and thank you both so much for being here this morning. It's a real gift to us, I think. And I have thought about, so I've got some questions to kind of guide our talking, but we can take or leave those questions. And I thought about the questions in kind of 3 different areas, thinking about your areas of experience and expertise that you both have, I think, from different perspectives. And I thought about those areas as being about the area of living with mental health concerns and diagnosis, the area of couples, being a couple, working with couple, and the area of therapy, doing therapy, experiencing therapy. Does that sound okay? Those areas all sound okay? Great. Thank you. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of overlap between them all as well. Is that all okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, although I've mentioned those 3 areas of expertise, I'd like to begin with a slightly different question, actually, which is that I think that your being here this morning is really special. And I wondered what it says about you as persons, maybe about your relationship to that and what you might value or stand for in your lives, that you have been willing to do this morning.
I look to you to start, I think.
I think from my experience, especially like in the service, I think it's important to make people have a very bad view of therapy still. It's still like when someone has to go to therapy, they feel like they're a failure, they feel like they can't help themselves. But it's sort of, I think, for me, like going through therapy, it's actually changed my opinion on it, because I had that view as well, like, I don't want therapy, I don't want this. But now it's sort of, I think it's a benefit, and getting that out to people and sort of sharing what I've learned through therapy, it kind of gives people like a bit more hope or a bit more confidence to engage in therapy and remain engaged in it.
And so is that kind of wanting to give people more hope and more confidence, is that something that you quite committed to
yeah.
Sharing hope and confidence with people?
Yeah, I think, especially because I've always been referred to as a complex case and all this, and it sort of gives that, like, if I can do it and I've got this, then I think I can help other people that either have what I have or have something different but can take inspiration from it.
Thank you. Heleni, do you want to add to that? Do you see anything?
I mean, I suppose as a therapist, I'm supposed to be working towards hope. But I think that's partly why I do what I do.
Did you have a similar commitment to
working
towards hope?
Yeah, and change perhaps, and maybe creating different understandings. But also, I think in terms of doing this, as I said, I think earlier on, for me, it's so important to give space to people with the experience to actually talk and share that and help others in that way.
And what do you think is important about that? Why is that important to you?
Because I have seen how people benefit much more, learn much more than that kind of sharing, than by sitting. I mean, obviously therapy has a different purpose and can also be very helpful, but I've seen the power of sharing connections around similar experiences. It's actually much more effective.
Insider experience.
Yeah. And also I think, because of my position in the system, it's probably much easier for me to have a voice and an influence, and if I can use that to actually enable other people to have that voice. For me, that's probably one of the most important things I can do.
And Heleni, from your knowledge and experience of Dom, would you say, and Dom said, I think that what being here shows of his values and commitments was about helping others towards hope and confidence because of his experience has changed so much. I mean, your ideas about therapy have changed so much in time. Do you see any other of Dom's values and what he stands for and gives importance to in his life kind of visible in his willingness to come and do this? And I know it's something you've done together elsewhere as well, his willingness to speak and to others.
I think for me it's your generosity. Both Dom and Seb, because I think from early on in our work, when I came with these ideas or proposals or invitations, they were both so generous in terms of wanting to share, even if they weren't there, to share their stories and so for me, generosity for both of them is a thing that I've really observed.
And actually, I'm glad you just mentioned Seb. Yes. And that's kind of a really good reminder that there is a third party to this conversation, I think, isn't there? And Seb isn't here today, but he generously gave his consent, I think, to both of you talking about your experience, your shared experience in the therapy. And that also makes me wonder then, what does it say about Seb that he was willing to do that? What does it say about his values and commitments?
What do you think it says?
I think Seb's very much a helpful person. He'll always put other people's needs before his sometimes. And I think he knows that the benefit of this sort of interaction, and even though he can't be here, he's willing and happy that he's still a part of our narrative in this context.
Thank you. So, I also just finally wanted to say, does it say anything about your relationship that you've been willing to do this? You've been knowing each other for 3 years, did you say? Yeah? Or does it say anything about your relationship that you've moved into this generous kind of act of coming to talk to us today?
I'm actually, to me, it means a lot in a way, because being the length of therapy is not really, with a therapist isn't too much of an issue for me, because both of my therapists were very long term. So I'm kind of used to working with therapists. But I think it's nice, when I had to do the mentalisation therapy, it was very much, the therapy stayed there. There was no interaction with the therapist outside of the therapy. It was a very strict sort of thing. But then here it's we work with Heleni's, it's not friends, but it's more kind of open environment that it's the material covered can be understood by a wider audience. So it's personal, but it's also very impersonal in a way.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Heleni, did you want to add to that?
I love this.
Yeah.
Actually, I hadn't quite thought it like that, but it makes me think that our work and our relationship has made me probably feel more able to be irreverent to some of therapy's rules and boundaries, hopefully in a helpful way. But I think it's also because Dom and Seb have made it much easier for me to maybe experiment a little bit or ask maybe more unorthodox questions or invitations. So I think because they've been open to some of this, it probably has made me more able to take risks that I wouldn't necessarily take it with other people I work with. And even the length of our work has been partly subversive in terms of the context and the system and finding different ways now of doing this. So it's given me much more space to be creative, I think.
Okay. And would you be able to say, I don't know how easy it would be to say, but what it might have been about Dom and Seb and what they brought as a couple to the therapy that made that possible for you?
The openness, and the fact that when they would suggest something, they would be willing to go with it or give it a go. Yeah. But also, I think the honesty in telling me if I was going too far, or if it was becoming not particularly helpful or relevant, which I think has also helped us keep it within what is helpful. Sometimes with creativity and flexibility you can go the other way. I think definitely the fact that they have been very honest and transparent about what fits or what doesn't fit, and said in particular, I think is very capable of letting me know if I'm pushing too much or and that has definitely, I think, helped us take more risks. And maybe also, I suppose I wonder if your long experience in therapy before our work was also helpful in Dom, I think, being more prepared to try different ways of working and being open to what I was trying to do that was different perhaps to your previous therapies.
So we're just kind of moving into actually talking about what the therapy was like and what happened there. Would it be okay to kind of move into talking about that area now? And actually, Dom, I was really interested, you already said something, I think, about what you brought with you to therapy in the first place. You thought, well, this therapy means I'm a failure or something. But had that begun to change before you met with Heleni because of your previous experience with therapy? Or?
Yeah, I think because like the therapy I had before Heleni was at the Dartmouth Park unit, so it was very personality-based, borderline. So it was it was like time limited, so you kind of had to go to it twice a week. So, but I think at the start of that I was very anti it. I didn't like the therapist. I resisted quite a bit, and then naturally as you go through the therapy, your barriers come down. You realise they're not there. They're there to help you, not to kind of make you feel worse about yourself. And then at the end of that time period, I can remember my therapist almost starting to cry on the last session, like holding back, and to me that really changed the way I saw the interaction between a patient and a therapist, because before you think it's work, it's very transactional, like they're doing their job, I'm doing what I'm meant to be here for. But then when that happened, it kind of made me realise that actually, even though it is work, they do actually have a level of care for the patient. And then I think when my psychiatrist suggested to do the therapy with Heleni, I was more accepting for it because I think it's something you know you need. So whereas the mentalisation was very much I-based, so it's all my experience, and although you're meant to learn other people, you don't, in that context, you don't think of it. So it was nice to come and be able to, with my experience of therapy, to start straight away, but be confident enough to sort of, even in that first meeting, like if I don't like her in the first time, it's not going to matter because I have to work on this anyway. So it's not really the therapist you dislike, it's the work you've got to do that you dislike.
You brought a very different
Yeah.
understanding of therapy to this therapy.
Yeah, and I
because
think
of what had happened in the previous.
I think that helped with Seb as well.
Yeah.
The fact that at least one of us could be open and he could see the interaction, and then see that it's not like he was very. I said very like, I don't see why we need this. I don't like, not resistant, but very ashamed of it.
Ashamed of
And
it.
yeah, and then obviously when he saw the openness we had and how it was helping, he opened up more and was like, okay, this is a positive, and then he started seeing it the same way. Like, this is something not negative, it's something that's working towards a positive.
So it sounds as though both you and Seb, before your experience of therapy, had those kind of stories about therapy being something to be ashamed of or signifying failure or something. Where do you think those kind of ideas about therapy come from? I'm sure they're very common actually, but where, in your experience, where do you think they come from?
I think it's because we're so, as a society, meant to be in control of, like we're meant to be in control of everything. We're meant to, from a young age, we're meant to know what we want to be as adults, and then as adults at the start of our career we need to know where we're going to be at the end of it. And I think when someone you've helped like yourself and you've built up your own coping mechanisms, whether they're right or wrong, the fact that you have to then go to see someone to challenge them makes you, that we're used to people going, oh wow, we did the wrong thing. So now it's like that shame of everyone else did it right and you did it wrong. And I remember when I started the mentalisation therapy, my attitude was, even though they were trying to give me the skills to do it, I was very much like, well, if these people don't have to put this much effort into their opinion, why should I? And why is mine wrong? Because everyone says theirs is right. And that's a very kind of, to me now, it's a very confrontational, very negative thing. It's not, you kind of have to accept that yes, some things in your life didn't go as everyone else, but there's ways you can put yourself on the right path, and it's sort of not a shame, it's not a bad thing to ask for help. But I think everyone, because of the stigma of mental health and like diagnosis,
So therapy can seem like a kind of a challenge to your very identity and to your abilities as a person, but you've experienced it differently as something. That's very interesting. Thank you. Heleni, I was just wondering whether it's very interesting to hear what ideas Dom has been in touch with about therapy, and I was wondering what ideas about couple therapy in your particular setting you brought to your meeting with Dom. So what hopes or expectations you might have had of the work based on your beliefs about therapy.
So I will go into that. I just remembered something that Seb had said in our previous interview that we did for another presentation about coming to therapy, to couples therapy, in terms of assumptions or ideas. And he said, I remember him saying that at first he thought that couple therapy is for couples who have been together for a very long time and they're married and at some point, they come across. So he was a bit shocked, I think, when you suggested that they come maybe earlier on in your relationship. But he also, I think, talked about expecting you to come to therapy and to be told how you should be doing things, and maybe a more psychoeducational approach around mental health. And that he experienced our first conversation was very different to that, because I was annoyingly asking questions that were quite irrelevant to what I think perhaps I thought they were coming for, including questions about him as the person without a diagnosis in that context. So for me, it was very interesting, when we had that conversation and Seb and Dom talked about their assumptions or expectations and how they were different. And I think that connects with my beliefs perhaps about therapy, because I know there is sometimes in our systems, there is maybe an expectation for the therapist to take an expert position in terms of knowing what people should be doing or how they should be, or what's best or what's better for people. And I think that's probably how people understand us, but also how some of us sometimes take those positions and roles in, and I've probably done it in different contexts and with different people. So I think I probably was at the point in my career and work where I didn't want to position myself as knowing. I know how to facilitate conversations and how to invite people to share understandings, but I'm definitely not an expert in what people do in their relationships. And I also, I think during the work that became apparent because Dom and Seb were able to come up with ways of managing certain things that were actually, extremely wise and helpful. And I probably learned from, or I could then use with other people I work with. So I think for me that it was, and it has become even more important to start from that place of, I might be able and knowing how to do certain things, but there's a lot that people bring that I don't know about, and it's important to ask about.
And I do want to hear more about those things that you learned from Dom and Seb as well. But you both mentioned a first session, and I just wondered if I could hear a bit more about that, because for me, I think that's something that's quite important. I think our first meetings with each other can sometimes make the whole difference somehow. And Seb, Dom, you talked about how actually you had kind of recovered from maybe a not very good beginning in a previous therapy. But I was wondering about your first session together and whether anything happened in that first session that gave you hope that this was going to be a worthwhile thing to do, and maybe particularly gave Seb some hope that it could be worthwhile because he was perhaps the one coming more doubtfully about it on this occasion. Is there anything that happened in that first session that was important, do you think? A long time ago, actually.
I think I think any first time you meet a new therapist, it's sort of you're sizing each other up. Yeah. And I think to me, I was aware of why I was there. It was so I knew I was here for something, but I think for Seb it was very the same, like who are these people that are going to get involved in my life. And I think Heleni made it very comfortable, and sort of even with when Seb realised it wasn't what he thought, there was no pressure, I'd say. There was no pressure for him to suddenly have to open up there and then. It was like, well, this is kind of what we're doing. And I think Seb thought it was, like he said, we're going to come here, he's going to learn how to deal with someone with schizophrenia or this. But I think even in the first, I think what I liked even in the first session was whenever my diagnosis would come up, Heleni was always like, but you're not your diagnosis. I don't, like, yeah, I'm aware of them, but I'm not seeing you as that. And I think that's very, for someone that's being told your diagnosis this is very, like, relaxing, not like sort of puts you at ease, because I'm kind of used to, like, when seeing a psychiatrist or that you're kind of seen as, I'm hitting a checkpoint, like he's got that, he's got this, he's done this. So you kind of feel like you're a definition, and you're not a person, but I think Heleni made us feel welcome, and like I wasn't my definition. And every time I would refer back to it, she was like, yeah, but you're not that, you're this.
She was really separating the diagnosis from the person who she was within the room with you. That had a relaxing effect, and
I think it kind of made. I think it's that anyone that gets validated as a person, regardless of what's wrong with them, I think that validation is what creates like the initial trust in someone.
Validating as a person. Yes, that's very powerful, thank you. Heleni, I don't know if you want to add anything to that about your experience of the first session, about what you think happened in that session that maybe made you also think that it might be worthwhile. It sounds like it was a bit of a surprise for you, and you and Seb particularly might have had different ideas about what this was going to be about. But.
Well, I mean, there were a few, I think, also, were you there as well? So Maria was part of the reflecting team. Yeah. We were co-working for the first year, or maybe a bit less. So there were 4 of us, actually. It's important to remember. I think for me, there were a few things. I think I didn't know what to expect because I had never met you or Seb, and I was really struck by, even your appearance and also the fact that they are obviously a same-sex couple, and I was thinking as a straight female, what it's going to be like. So there were all these things, I think, going on for me. And because I suppose they're also both very creative, and that became very apparent from the first set, as we were getting to know each other, and Dom and Seb were talking about the things they do in their lives and outside of the illness and diagnosis. And I think I got so interested in that, or those aspects of your life, maybe more interested in those to begin with, and wanting to understand those, and maybe that's where, this idea that, okay, yes, you have the diagnosis, but that's not all. That's far from it. I think that's perhaps where it came from, because there were so many other things to learn about and to hear about. I think the other thing I remember with Seb, because English is not his first language, and we're both, I suppose, more Mediterranean, or I think Seb made a different connection, and we both have strong accents, so there was a lot around understanding each other. So I think that actually was very helpful in giving a different tone to our conversations and inviting us to be more curious, I think, about each other in some ways. So there was a lot of things for me to understand about how Dom and Seb did the relationship and therapy and all the expectations or assumptions.
So there's a lot in that I would like to ask more about, but the time is moving on very quickly, or it's going very quickly. So I just wanted to ask you a bit more about the kind of therapy as it moved on, and whether there were some standout moments or turning points in the therapy for you, Dom, for you and Seb, maybe. that times where you think you thought made a real difference somehow to your life as a couple or your life as an individual?
So many.
So many, yeah.
I think, like, I know one of the things that always stuck out with Seb and me was the session where we sort of tried to speak to the voices, and not, so it was to work out the role of, say, the voices and sort of delusions in the relationship and my relationship with people. And I think that was very eye-opening, and I learned a lot, even about that sort of side of my illness that I hadn't knew before, but it kind of allowed me that strength to be like, oh, actually, yeah, okay, if that's there because of this, then, and it kind of helps. I think anything you learn about yourself helps understand your understanding of yourself and the way you move forward. But I think, yeah, like the openness and not letting me scout around a point, like start going, like wandering off somewhere. Heleni's always like, no, you've gone off, this is what I'm asking. And so kind of like always making good use of the time, I think, is something I've always remembered. Like there was never a session where I left thinking that, oh, I didn't talk what I wanted to, and that's
So making good use of the time, being really focused and bringing you back to something. But there was also something really powerful about that conversation you had around the voices and that. Yeah.
I think for me, like with what we were saying about not seeing me as a diagnosis, I think that was something that I think really, in a way, benefited Seb as well, because I think when you're a partner with someone with mental health, I think they always feel that they've either got to be a carer or something else, or not care, and I think the understanding of that it's not his role to be a carer, and it's not his role to understand the diagnosis. It's our role as a couple to understand our relationship under all these contexts. And I think that helped him understand a bit more and
to the
feel
focus
more
on the relationship
rather than just
a diagnosis and your identities in relation to the diagnosis. It's about you as a couple. That's really powerful. Heleni, can I just ask you whether there were turning points or significant moments for you in the therapy in terms of your development as a therapist, things that stand out for you that took you somewhere different as a therapist that you might not otherwise have got to?
So I think definitely that session with the voice, where we invited the voices.
What did you do? You invited the voices?
The voices to come in and talk to me. Or be interviewed by me, rather. Which I think was, before I spoke about taking risks, and I think that was a risk that we took, that we probably hadn't talked about much before. But I felt that it was there. It was always present, and in our conversations, and I think in your life outside of therapy. So I think that session was very powerful for me in terms of understanding the role of and the impact of the voices on Don's life, but also in his relationships.
Don, is that something?
And to therapy, because I think the voices have very strong impact on relationship, or had on our therapy as well, and on our work together. So that was a turning point in terms of just naming it and bringing it out.
And is that something that has had an ongoing influence in your work with other people, for instance, other couples?
Yes, in that perhaps I'm probably more prone to do something like that earlier on in the work and think about whether it's going to be helpful. I mean, I think, again, Dominic said, because they're open to trying different things, it was perhaps easier to do and think about doing. I think it might not work with everyone, but it definitely made me think that might be a helpful...
Take risks again.
Yeah, and that might be a helpful thing in terms of, partners or other family members understanding of what it might feel and look like. Because I think my experience is that voices or other ideas and experiences can also be very personal, and partners or other family members might be a bit reluctant to ask.
So Heleni,
and maybe building more on that understanding actually for others around the person.
And that just connects for me a bit with we must be coming to pause in a short while, but it reminded me of something I wanted to ask about mental health concerns. I don't know, what do you call it? I'm using the word mental health concerns. What language do you use, Dom?
I think difficulties.
Difficulties. Thank you. So I wanted to ask about how your experience of living with mental health difficulties and mental health diagnosis, and they're probably two different things, I think, aren't they? But how they might have been influencing your life when you arrived at therapy, and your life as a couple when you arrived at therapy, whether that changed over time in therapy, the kind of influence of the difficulties and the diagnosis.
I think, for me, I think if I was to say my difficulties in a relationship, they were very, very pronounced, which is why it's like a typical borderline relationship. That was always my pattern of relationships. And then after the mentalisation therapy, I was a bit more relaxed in my relationships, but still very much had a black and white thinking, and so when I was offered to do this, it was sort of right, okay, I'm still having issues with relationships, I can challenge this. And I think that's what helped as well, it's constantly challenging. It's a difficulty, it's a diagnosis, but you can either just keep the difficulty and say, I've given up, or you say, I'm a diagnosis, therefore I've got to do this.
Yeah.
But it's sort of, I think, for me, my attitude of it is, knowing that I can, you're not going to get back to the position you were 5 years ago, but there's always a good plateau to start with. It might not be as good as it was, but it's a place to start. And I think it just made me think of our last session where me and Seb were talking about the difficulties we were having at that time. It was like Heleni was saying, even if you take a break or you step back for a bit, always remember why you were here. So it's sort of like that. Why as a couple you came to the therapy, and why you're a couple. So always remembering the good, and I think that's sort of something that I've learned to counter my difficulties, is always find a positive in everything and work from that.
So pushing back against some of those tendencies of diagnosis to...
And I think as well, I think, like I said, I learned from Heleni, I wasn't someone that really kind of blamed. If I did something, I wouldn't be like, it's because I'm borderline, or because of this. I kind of always take responsibility that I did it, but I think you've always got that bit in your head, but I only did it because I've got this. So you kind of justify your actions, and I think with Heleni being very much no, you're not a diagnosis. This is a criteria. This is so it's always you own your mental difficulties. They don't own you. think that's how I see it now.
You own your mental health difficulties, they don't own you.
Yeah.
So Heleni, I'd love to ask you about what you saw of that process happening, of Dom and Seb really pushing back against that interference from the diagnosis in their relationship. But I'm kind of aware of the time. I want to make sure that you also have a chance to hear from outsider witnesses and to respond to that. I suppose I definitely a couple of things I do want to ask you actually, but the people present here, is there anything that you would particularly want them to know from your experience, Dom, from your experience as in a couple and someone who's been through couple therapy, and also someone who has expertise in the mental health? Are there particular things you would like the people here to know, that you would like to take account of or to have influenced them in their future work?
I think it's, like I said, like see both, if it's like a couple in front of you, see them both as individuals, but not the individuals that have come together as a couple. So, one's mentally ill and has these issues that you kind of have to work around, but they're still two individuals, and I think always remind them to think of the positives. Like even with all the negatives, always to go back and be like, think why you got together and what it was about the person that before you started building up these walls that you liked, that attracted you. So
what attracted you to each other that's really still there behind the walls. Lovely, thank you. Heleni, is there anything you would want particularly?
This is the way I've learned so much in terms, when you were saying about not going too quickly into the blaming. We worked on that, but I think I learned from that as well, because I think we all do a bit of that, especially in the relationship. There's a lot of, well, I only did it because you did this, and it's very quick. So I think watching or witnessing Dom and Seb changing that or shifting it, even in the sessions, there were moments where they would pause and not do it. Taught me, I think, how to do it outside. So there were things like that, I think, that we kind of worked on together, but I also learned from my own life and lessons, I think. And I think I remember when I brought our conversations to another group, and I think one of the questions Dom and Seb had asked at that point was any suggestions that people might have about communication. And through our interview, there were already a lot of suggestions that Dom and Seb had come up with, and someone from the audience actually noticed it and pointed out. I was like, well, no, they've told us already. So I think for me there's something about, reminding Dom and Seb that actually there are a lot of resources and knowledge that they have, and maybe our conversations have helped brought this forth. Or
the knowledge and resources that were already there or that were developing as you went along together, bringing those to the fore. Great, thank you. And so finally, is there anything that probably loads of things actually, but anything really important that I haven't asked you that you would like to answer? I had got loads more questions, but I knew we would run out of time. But
no, because I'm curious to hear other people now.
Okay, and for you, Dom, is there anything that you would want to be? Okay, well, thank you both very much. That was incredibly interesting and helpful. Thank you. So we may not have time to fully talk about all of these questions for you, in response to the outsider witnessing. But I wonder how that was for you. First of all, just how was it to listen?
I think it's like, I guess like, I'm glad to hear that people have learned something. And I think I was actually thinking when I was sat there, I was thinking, I think it was like about the experience of seeing it, and I thought I think to me it's like, okay, for therapists to see a patient say, oh, this is this, and see that Heleni took different approaches helps them, but I think in the context of like the patient seeing how open the therapists are to change is like a very important aspect as well. That, you know, I think, like we said, therapy is everyone's expected to be so regimented that we've learned this way and this is the way it's done. But to see like the willingness of the therapist to make a change to accommodate that situation, I think it means a lot.
Yeah, is that something that kind of really stood out for you as you were listening to the conversation, the therapist's willingness to change and to take on different perspectives? Yeah. So I wonder if I could just ask you about this, maybe this whole experience of both, I guess as you were talking, you were also listening to yourselves and each other, and then listening to the outsider witnesses, where this has taken you, or where it's moved you to that you might not have otherwise been moved to had you been shopping or gardening this morning.
I think it's that constant learning. You know, I think you know, I having the experience I've gone through, like with different types of therapy and just life in general, we don't stop learning, but it's you learn. I think people see learning as like again that you go to college or you do the things, but I think you can learn so much just from listening to other people's views, and I think like hearing someone like say a quote that I said that I was thinking like, did I say that? But it's sort of it's like yeah, it shows that you've learned because it's like you're even learning stuff that you said about yourself.
To that process of learning and knowing that you're learning, seeing how much you learn. And I love something about learning by just listening to different voices and different, So I want to thank you both enormously. It's been an incredibly special opportunity. Thank you both. And you heard from people how much you've stimulated their thinking, and then actually these are perspectives we need to hear more and more of. We're learning so much from that. So thank you so very much.